Hey, what's going on? Joss here. I hope you are doing great. Welcome to the YouTube channel. And in today's video, I've decided that I'm just going to give you guys a bit of a better understanding as to who I am, what I do, where I come from. A lot of you have been asking what I do for a living. This question came about online after I posted some photos of my Porsche 911. Just give you guys a bit of background on myself. And so to get into it, my name's Joss. I'm 29 years old. I've done over 25 million Rand in e-commerce and I've done over 100 million Rand in sales. I own multiple different e-com brands in various niches that sell to all different countries around the world. From having my own e-com brands, it has changed my life in the most incredible ways. It's brought me some of the greatest opportunities of meeting the most incredible people, visiting the most amazing places, and doing things like being able to buy my dream car, buy my dream house. And I'm just very grateful that I decided to actually follow the path of starting my own e-com brand and stick with it because I don't actually know what my life would look like without it. So let's get into it. I was born in 97. I'm actually starting to feel like a bit of a fossil, but I was born a single child between my mom and my dad. I do have a half brother and a half sister who is from my mom's previous marriage, and they've definitely been involved in my life as if they were like a normal brother or sister. But I grew up with very loving and very supporting parents. When my mom met my dad, my mom was the breadwinner. But very soon my dad eventually did start his own business and my mom was able to stay at home. So I was very grateful that my mom was able to be there for things like my sports days, take me and support me on all my tennis games, all my soccer games. And that was definitely a major blessing. She was always there to help me with all of my homework. And so I was very grateful for that. But I was born into a pretty normal, loving family. My parents did get divorced when I was around 16. And so we had a bit of turbulence there, but nothing that doesn't shape us for the better. But growing up, I was always exposed to my dad working really hard. That's definitely one thing that my dad taught me was that you're always going to need to put in hard work no matter what it is that you're doing. And just being able to watch him work so relentlessly, work so hard, so many hours, and just always seeing him not home because he was working made me realize what it's actually going to take to be successful. But my dad's done very well for himself considering where he came from, because he was born into pretty much absolutely nothing. And so he definitely had the hunger, he had the drive to be able to make something of himself, make something of his life. And so I'm very grateful that I was exposed to that from a very young age. Always been there to support me no matter what I do. And so I definitely think that that's played a big role in just having someone to back you in, like, go for it, like you should go for this opportunity. I was definitely not born into a rich family, but we weren't really poor. I did watch videos of myself playing with newspaper and cardboard boxes, so I don't think we were that well off, but we definitely weren't poor. But yeah, a pretty average family in terms of what our financial status was. I was around about 14, 15 when my dad started to make a success of himself, when he started to become successful in what he did. And so during my younger years, I was sent to a primary school called Hillcrest Christian Academy, and this was an amazing school. I absolutely loved it. I was blessed enough to go to a private school, but I loved every minute of it. I spent more time outside the classroom than I did inside the classroom, and I saw my parents in the headmaster's office majority of the time when I was at school. So I definitely did not fit in. I definitely struggled academically. I was not a strong student. I would always find every excuse under the sun as to why I couldn't complete my homework. And back then, I used to look at it as laziness. I used to think to myself, I'm quite a lazy person, but I just had no interest in what the homework was. It was only later on when I started to find out what I was actually interested in, I realized, hang on, if I'm interested in something, I can actually pay attention for a long duration and get things done. So that shift only really happened later on, but I used to think that I was just a really lazy kid, a really lazy student. But I was just barely scraping by in class. My teachers were always having to push me through every grade. HCA then later became Karo as we know it today, but HCA played a vital role in really building the foundation of my faith. It is a very heavily faith-based school, and so I'm very grateful for things that I learned about cultivating a relationship with Jesus. I was by no means a popular student, but it's definitely where the entrepreneurial side of me started. I think it was around grade 4 or 5 where I started to sell tech decks, these little fingerboards. I used to get them from a guy down my road and sell them to guys for like double the price at school. I started to later sell different things, radio control car parts. I was buying them from suppliers from China and selling them to my friends at school. I'd find out what model of car they would have. And I would always bring the parts in for the richest kids because I knew the richest kids were definitely going to ask their parents and get a yes. It was in primary school when I actually got my first job. I worked at a hobby store and I learned a lot about the psychology of marketing working at that hobby store. When you would watch a father come in and he'd be asking you questions about a radio control car, he's not thinking about the radio control car. He doesn't actually care about the radio control car. He's thinking about the look on his son's face when he takes it home. And so I really learned the psychology of marketing at a young age, understanding, what is it that the buyer, what is it that the customer is really looking for? What does it really look like? And so I definitely learned a hell of a lot working in a hobby store. Then went to a high school called Waldorf. Some of you might know it. It's a pretty like artsy type of school. Didn't really work with me. I was expelled after like maybe a year and a half. I just wasn't attending school enough. The teachers really didn't like me. I guess that's always the excuse. The teachers didn't like me. I really don't think they liked me, but I was just a really difficult student and school really didn't suit me. And I just knew that like it wasn't a place that I wanted to be. That was a pretty strange high school, to be completely honest. I enjoyed it. We used to like skateboard and break and stuff. You could wear civvies to school. So that was the pull. I was like, I don't have to wear a uniform. Sign me up. We were doing all sorts of funny things at that school. We were skateboarding at break. We were doing farming as like a main lesson. I think I remember gardening being one of like the lessons that we actually had to like study for, and then we'd go and we'd garden. Anyway, that was a strange time in my life. It didn't last very long because it didn't suit me well. Looking back on it now, I'm actually quite surprised that I went. But one major thing I'd give credit to Waldorf for is introducing me to the people that got me involved in music. That absolutely changed the trajectory of my life. That school's also pretty heavily involved in music, so that's definitely a pretty cool side of it, and I'm very grateful that I got to do what I did there in the music scene. But we'll get into that later. Like, one thing to note, during my time in primary school, during my time in high school, I was always a very driven person in terms of like what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that I was going to be successful, even though I didn't know how. I just knew that I was going to get there. And so I've always been very determined, and I've always been very consistent in whatever it is that I do. But whatever I enjoy, I strive to excel at it because it's just part of my nature. It's just who I am. And so I left school in grade 10, and I said to myself when I left that I ain't going back. I knew that I wasn't going back to school. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do, but I was going to make a plan so that I didn't have to go back. And so I went to my dad and I said to my dad, Dad, I want to start a business. And so he said to me, if you want to start a business, I'll help you start it, but you got to come to me with the business plan, and it's got to be a solid business plan. And so I set out for a couple of weeks to come up with this grand business plan of how I was going to become rich. So after weeks and weeks of looking and trying to source products and trying to find out, what could I possibly sell? During that time, I had seen these things called Segways. You've probably seen them, the movie More Cop, but I saw these Segways and I thought to myself, I want one of those. And after looking at the price of what one of them were, I think it was like 140,000 Rand at the time. This is maybe like, I don't know how long, this is like 10 years. But I didn't just give up there. I thought, let me look if there's any alternative. Like there's got to be someone else selling these things. And after looking, there was no one selling them. There was no one directly competing with Segway. There was a lot more cost-effective alternatives coming directly out of Shenzhen, out of China. So I found these manufacturers through a trade site, reached out to them, and I found out that I could get this thing at a fraction of the cost. Hang on, I can possibly save up for one of these things one day. Now I was still pretty young at the time, so I was thinking of stupid things like Segways, but I was just trying to solve my own problem. I couldn't afford a Segway. I needed a more cost-effective alternative. And so I was just solving my own problem. I wasn't looking for a winning product. And so after finding this manufacturer, I said to them, listen, can you supply me with a pro forma of like 10 of this type, 10 of this type, and a bunch of spares in case I needed to back up any of the issues. And so they sent me my first pro forma to fill up a 20-foot container. I had a look at all the competitors, realized there weren't any competitors. And I knew that I could probably sell these to malls. I knew I could probably sell them to estates and the security companies. I knew I could possibly lease these to security companies. So that was giving me an opportunity of recurring revenue every single month. So I knew there was a gap. I saw a gap in the market. And so from me just trying to solve my own problem, I eventually found the product that I was later going to sell. And so I went to my dad with this business plan. I said, Dad, this is how I'm going to do it. This is where I'm getting the things from. He said, all right, I'll loan you the money, but you got to pay me back the money. No matter how long it takes you, you have to pay me back. I was like, if this means that I do not have to go back to school on Monday, I am in. So I took the opportunity. I flew these Segways in just before I was about to turn 18. But during the course of me building this business, I had approached the MD of LG South Africa. He had found out that he was going to get retrenched and he didn't have a backup plan. So I approached him and I said, listen, I've got this grand business idea, but I'm a little bit young and I don't think the guys are going to trust me when I walk into meetings trying to sell these things for the price that they are. So would you be able to maybe step in on these meetings and be able to close for me? Him being the MD of LG South Africa, he used to do major meetings for LG, closing deals for hundreds of millions of rands. He used to go over to Korea, deal directly with all the big guys. And so he had a lot of experience behind him, a lot of wisdom that I knew that I could definitely absorb and I could apply. So he got involved in the business. And so eventually the first container docked. And once they got here, I realized, okay, Now I need to figure out how to sell these things. And me being pretty obsessed with tech at the time, I was definitely playing with like all the gadgets. I'd already found out at a young age about Google ads, Facebook ads, but no one was really utilizing this. Like no one was using it to its full extent or really seeing what it could do. So I designed my first website on Wix at like 17 years old. Again, I think Wix also just came out at this time. Designed my first website and started running ads. Like you genuinely had to have some resilience in you if you wanted to set up your Google ads correctly back in the day. I'd set up my campaign, and because there was no competition, the ads started to cook. This was why I was able to do my first million. I'm at 17 years old within the first year. I managed to pay my dad back for the first shipment, and we actually brought in a few shipments after that. I was also one of the first people to bring in the hoverboard. I don't know if you remember that 2-wheel hoverboard, also a self-balancing device. But I was one of the first people to bring it in before any of the big corporate guys brought them in, any of the big guys like Macro and Game, etc. And those were absolutely flying online as well. And so that was my first experience with Google ads and with Facebook ads, and realizing the leverage that these platforms had for a business in terms of the level of distribution and the scale of distribution that I could do, getting my message out there in order to acquire customers, acquire leads. It absolutely changed my perspective on what was possible. And I think it was also because I went into an industry that maybe had no competition, I was really able to see the full effects of it. I was just focused on getting the next deal, getting the next sale, setting up the next meeting. It was a really exciting time in my life, really starting up this business, figuring out all the odds and ends, and really just understanding the ecosystem of how a business functions. But I later sold that business, I exited that business, and so I had my first exit at like 18 years old. Sold it off to my partner at the time, and I decided to move on. And that's when my life took a completely different trajectory. I developed a huge passion for music, a huge passion for singing, and I decided I'm gonna go all into this and started writing songs, trying to get myself out there, get myself onto radio stations. I was reaching out to people like Gareth Cliff. He ended up saying yes, got me onto his radio station. That got me onto national radio on 5FM with that song, and one thing just led to another. That's when I had my first record label phone, and it wasn't actually the record label. I had met this guy named Rashawn. I actually cannot remember where I had met him from or how he got my phone number, but he phoned me 7 a.m. in the morning. And he was like, hey bro, and I was like, hey bro. Meanwhile, I had no idea who he was. He was like, hey bro, listen, I've got a friend. He's just started a record label and he's looking for artists to break. He's looking for South African artists to break. Would you be interested in meeting him? So I'm like, who is your friend? So he says, no, like, this is him, go and Google him. So I go and Google this guy. And I just see press everywhere. Like, this guy is a major success. He's done over $1 billion in sales. And that's when he was at the age of, I think, of like 27 or 28 years old. And so I was like, yes, absolutely. I'll be there. This guy clearly knows what he's doing. And so I went down to this meeting. Meeting was probably the one that changed the trajectory of my life the most in terms of what I was exposed to. From signing that record deal, I have worked with Grammy-nominated artists. I've traveled the world. I performed with artists like Sean Kingston. I managed to meet artists like Post Malone. We played beer pong backstage. I met his manager, Dre London, at a local casino, funny enough. I was exposed to the most insane stuff. Like, it just blew my mind. But I was flying first class. I was staying in the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. And this was all from me really just taking the risk on something which I honestly had, like, no one in my family was musically talented, like, at all. I was the first one to just say, I'm gonna just try this thing. And it was so different from business, which was the first thing I did up until the age of like 18. And so going into music was a completely different path for me, but what it afforded me and what it exposed me to in terms of what is actually possible when you commit to something, when you're passionate and when you don't give up. Although I was on the label's money, I was a broke artist at the time, I was on the label's money, I was being exposed to the craziest stuff. And so I was like, okay, this, just to know what is possible and to know what's out there, it really broadened my perspective. Because before that, I would have never known like what's on the other side of just trying. And being around this guy opened my eyes as to what it is really going to take to be successful. Seeing him work until 3 in the morning, getting up at 6:30 and then just starting all over again. The amount of traveling that we were doing, working while traveling. And this mentor of mine was in the room with some of the most successful people in the world. So how I was able to meet Jim Quick, who's the world's #1 brain coach. One of the events that I was performing at called Winning Edge, he was also talking at. And so getting to meet Jim Quick and understand, you know, what it is like to perform at a super high level cognitively and what's required was also an absolute eye-opener. Jim and I are still very good friends still to this day. But anyway, I don't want to ramble too much about the whole music side of things, but it really afforded me a whole lot of opportunities that I would have never been able to do by myself. And so taking risks, in an area where there's typically very little reward, especially being from South Africa. You know, I was just following a passion. I wasn't trying to chase money. I wasn't trying to chase status. I was just following the passion of music. And I think that's what led me to all of those opportunities. It was just pure intention of, you know, I just want to do music. I just enjoy making songs and coming up with some cool stuff. And after signing with that record label, I ended up signing with another record label in Los Angeles, Riverton Entertainment. They've also worked with some of the biggest artists, Chris Brown, Justin Bieber, Post Malone, Sway Lee, some of the biggest artists. And so they signed me for a year. Again, I was on label money, also being exposed to some of the coolest things, doing some of the coolest collabs with other artists from all around the world. Enjoyed everything about making music. And so I think just going in there with like, I'm just going in because I love doing this is possibly what was able to afford me all of those opportunities. And so I was very grateful for what it did for me, but I knew that it wasn't something that I was going to do forever. It wasn't going to be the be or end all, especially in South Africa. It's very difficult to make a music career being from South Africa unless you go overseas. And I didn't necessarily see myself doing that at the time for good. During the time of my music career, I was able to achieve around 10 million streams, and half of those I can attribute towards paid advertising. Everything that I'd learned about Meta and Google advertising, selling the alternative segways. It was actually called EcoGlide. There's probably some stuff still up online about it. But everything that I'd learned about paid advertising there, I took into the music side. And I was running conversion-based ads for song downloads. And I was probably one of the first guys doing this. I don't think there was any record labels running conversion-based ads for downloads. Again, the paid advertising played a major role in also getting me noticed, getting me onto those national radio stations, because it gave me a lot of leverage. People see me on social media all the time, especially when nobody was really doing this or paying attention to paid advertising. It definitely played a massive role and built a lot of credibility for myself. I started to gain a pretty big following from the music as well. I saw again the leverage that paid advertising had for a creator, not even a business at this point. I knew that I was going to go into something that had to do with paid advertising because I was like, I'm really passionate about it. I'm pretty good at it. And it has a lot of opportunity to be able to help businesses out there. And so I just see this as a form of making money while doing something that I love. I knew that I was going to help my dad out with his business. He was doing relatively well at the time, but I saw an opportunity for me to use the paid advertising, specifically the Google ad side, and implement it into his business and help him with lead generation. I'd already seen success with my previous business, EcoGlide, with both the segways and the hoverboards, and so I knew I could probably replicate it here. The business that he was in was pretty high ticket in terms of the price point of the products that he was selling. And so I did see a lot of opportunity. I thought, well, if there's a lot of margin here, there's a lot of opportunity. But, you know, we weren't expecting a sale every single day within that sort of business. But I eventually implemented paid advertising into his business. We were also running some Meta ads at the time. We were pumping out the ads and we managed to scale that business and double the revenue in 12 months. And that changed the way I view business again entirely, because I knew I had seen success from the previous businesses, but the products in this business were a lot higher margin, a lot higher ticket. And I was able to consistently close a deal a day in this business. And this was also foreign to my dad. He had also never seen these sort of numbers consistently throughout the month and consistently seen this sort of growth. And so besides surprising my dad with what was going on, I was surprising my friends, because my friends were obviously seeing, you know, me buy nicer things, do cooler things, go cooler places. So my friends were asking me like, what are you doing? And I was just explaining, listen, I'm helping my dad out with his business, but it's sort of working. So they would ask me, listen, can you maybe sit down with us, have a look at my family business and see if you could assist us? And because my dad's business was specifically in the lead generation B2B side, this was my first time being exposed to Shopify. And I'm so glad and so appreciative that I took the opportunity to do this with absolutely no pay guaranteed. I was just like, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to try to get you sales. So my friend's family business was already in a bunch of retail outlets, but they hadn't built an online presence. There was nothing about them online. So I loaded up all of their products, did the best job that I possibly could for the first time building a Shopify store, and nothing really happened in the beginning. It did take a couple of months before things started to turn, but very slowly the store started to get sales and we started to scale week after week after week. And before we knew it, it had done over 100,000 Rand. And I was like, okay, there's something going on here. It's definitely got opportunity. And I realized that a lot of this was also on autopilot. Once the ads got running, the sales would just generate. And so seeing how automated this business was and how much leverage the distribution of the ads had for the business again, I was like, no, this is definitely a golden opportunity. So I went all into helping my friend's family business scale the e-com side. And that was the first business that I had built credible results for, that I was able to take to other businesses and say, I can do this for you too. And that was how my agency started. My agency still runs to this day. It's called adagency.co. You can check it out online. A bunch of team members now that manage the whole business. And I expanded my clientele into various different niches. I even got flown out and started doing work for the Foschini group that brought me onto a couple of projects on the paid media side. I've worked with solopreneurs. I've worked with some of the biggest corporates. I've worked with really successful family businesses. It really has been a huge array of different businesses. And I think this has been a power skill for me that I've developed through doing this. It exposed me to so many different markets, and I've had to figure out what converts for all of these different markets and how to articulate a message to that specific customer. And working in so many different niches, you start to figure out a pattern. You start to realize, okay, there is a formula to this. So I was using paid advertising to find my own clients and then obviously helping them with their paid advertising. And I was hunting specifically for B2B and for e-com based businesses. And we saw a lot of success in the first year. We had done over, I think, maybe like 10, 15 million Rand in the first year with the businesses that were assisting. And so this was still when the agency model, again, was still very new. There weren't too many people on the whole agency model, but it's a very lucrative business. I expanded my network vastly, met some of the most incredible people, very wealthy entrepreneurs. I also began to understand the difference between rich entrepreneurs and wealthy entrepreneurs. I met a lot of rich people, but I realized that by their definition of rich, all they actually had was money. They didn't have wealth. Wealth, as Tony Robbins likes to say it, and I back it, is being able to extract the maximum amount of joy out of any situation. And so I've seen rich people and I've seen wealthy people, and they're two very different kinds. And so I'm very grateful that I was exposed to that as well, and understanding, what is driving somebody. And if I look back on my agency now and I think, how was I able to make as much of a success of it as I did? I was just extremely obsessed with the process. I was extremely obsessed with paid advertising, and I was obsessed with getting results. And I was leveraging the last client's results to get the next client, and I was leveraging the last two clients' results to get the third client. And I just continued that formula the entire time, because nothing speaks better than the actual proof. And so I just made sure that I did the best possible job for the clients that I have so that I could get future customers. And that formula absolutely worked for me. I think that's why the agency still goes to this day, even though I'm not too heavily involved in it. Really just overlook, everybody in it. But going all in and starting my agency, it really stretched my knowledge as to what is possible with paid advertising. But during the course of scaling these e-com brands that I was working for, I was exposed to the numbers that they were doing, and the revenue that they were doing was just insane. And I was earning an absolute fraction of what the revenue was that I was generating for them, and I was like, this isn't fair. So I was like, I need to start my own brand. Like, if there's the next step, it's absolutely to start my own brand. And that's exactly what I did. I started my hunt for a bunch of products. And so I initially started off with plug and play because I didn't have a product. I didn't have any means of also handling any of the fulfillment or anything like that. And so I was like, I'm going to start with plug and play. I got to around about 6 figures per month and struggled to get past there. But it had got me to a really good place in terms of not being able to focus on the ad agency clients as much myself. But I'd seen success with the plug and play, and I was happy with what I was doing, but I was struggling to scale past 6 figures. And so I knew that the next best step was probably to go private label. I had to go direct to the manufacturer and buy in bulk. And that changed the game for me because the profit margins were obviously a lot better. So I started making a lot more money from just investing the money up front, taking a bit of capital, investing that money up front, buying in bulk. I also then had enough stock to supply throughout the month, but the main thing is that the product economics made sense. There was a lot more margin in it for me. Now, during the time of me sourcing my first bunch of e-com products, I realized that you don't need to have the most intriguing or the most interesting product. You sometimes just need to have a product that's slightly more affordable than the competitors, or marketed slightly better than the competitors. It's about being just 1% better in each area than the competitor, and that's what makes you become the obvious choice. One that makes the most sense when it comes down to the product economics. If you've got a lot of margin in it, then there's a lot of room to make mistakes, and there's a lot of room to still scale. It's not about the coolest product. It's about a product that's low friction, easy to absorb, easy to understand. You don't have to educate the audience on it a whole lot. Notice that if you bring a product in that nobody really knows about because you think it's interesting and now there's no competition, what's going to happen is you now still have to educate that customer on it. And it takes time, it takes money, and it takes efforts to educate the market on something in order to get them to trust you and in order to get them to buy the product. It's a lot easier to steal the attention from an audience when they're really well educated on a product, and you just need to put a better offer in front of them. And so that was a great lesson for me. Creating attention is a lot more expensive than stealing attention. And so I knew I didn't have to find anything that was incredible, out of the ordinary, world's best product. I had to find something that was easy to understand, palatable, and had good margins. They made sure that the perceived value was there. So when they parted with their money, they felt like they were getting more than the money that they were parting with. And this is really just knowledge accumulated after years and years and years of managing multiple different brands and multiple niches and then starting my own ones. And back then, success for me was R1 million a month. I just wanted to hit 7 figures because with 60% profit margins, that was enough to change my life. I'd already experienced what it was like to do 100, 200,000 Rand a month. So I knew if I could do R1 million, this was going to be the one. And after bringing in the private label products, having the product economics in place, being able to scale efficiently, getting better and better at the ads that I was creating for that brand, I'd eventually hit 7 figures. And during the course of scaling this ecom brand, I learned probably one of the most important things that everybody overlooks, and that's buyer psychology. When it comes to selling products online, you have to understand exactly what it's going to take in order to take a customer from cold to converted. If you aren't able to give a customer a reason to buy today, they'll buy from somebody else tomorrow. After successfully scaling my first ecom brand, I was absolutely hooked. I started the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and so on. At this point, I now manage 8 ecom brands. So taking the leap of faith to step away from my agency, get some other people involved there to take over and to go all in on my ecom brands, although it was so scary, so daunting because I already had a good clientele, I was already making a decent amount of money. I just knew that there was more available on the horizon. And there were so many things to the business model that attracted me. Number one, being the biggest lever, the biggest mechanism for growth in the business is the paid advertising. And having full control over the distribution of how your message gets to market, I think is an incredible advantage that is still overlooked to this day, and most businesses still don't take advantage of. Knowing that the fulfillment I didn't have to handle was an area of the business that could be handled by third party. I wasn't tied down to a specific location. I didn't have to have any team members in order to actually get started. And I didn't have to have a whole lot of capital to be able to actually launch my brand and get products on my store. It was low capital, low risk, high reward. I was all in. And I think it's because I saw that value within ecom. I saw what it had to offer. That's why I went all in. It's why I had the determination. And that's maybe why I had the faith to step away from my ad agency and go all in on the ecom. It's because I just knew that the ecosystem of this business model was just unlike any other. It was going to be able to afford me a lot more free time and the opportunity to achieve a lot more growth if I just focused on it and if I actually gave it my all. I feel like I've lived 10 different lives. And now looking at the ecom brands that I've built and what we've got, I wouldn't want to actually imagine life any differently. I'm so grateful and so blessed of what it's been able to afford me. And so about 1.5 years into building my own ecom brands, I had bought myself my dream Porsche 911. I posted some pictures up online of it. The questions came in, what do I do for a living? Asking me a bunch of questions. And after explaining that I own a handful of ecom brands, I was also posting revenue screenshots of my Shopify dashboard online. And I was just getting a ton of people asking me, listen, can you help me get started? Can you help me start my own brand? And so I was just mentoring people for free in a WhatsApp group. I eventually had like 50, 60 people in a WhatsApp group that I was just mentoring for free after them seeing like me post some stuff online. And after seeing the interaction from people and seeing the success, I was focusing heavily on just these 60 people. And I managed to get 6 out of the 60 to do 100,000 Rand in 3 months. I knew that I definitely found a formula because I was able to replicate the success across various niches that I was building brands within. I was just helping them at random, where I could, how I could. And so when it came to giving people advice who wanted to get started, I felt like I could definitely add a lot of value and point them in the right direction. And so the proof was in the pudding. I knew that I had something solid. I knew that it worked. And so the opportunity of being able to help people start their own ecom brand really just came organically from me posting my own success and being able to help people in the process and help them change their lives. I knew that this was something that I wanted to be heavily involved in and that I wanted to help people scale their own ecom brand. Now today I've helped over 400 brand owners scale their own ecom brand from zero. We've done over 40 million in Shopify sales collectively. And it has been one of the most rewarding journeys that I've ever been on. There's a saying that the secret to living is giving. And I stand behind that 100%. It is one of the most rewarding things to be able to be part of and to be able to see somebody create a success of their life. For myself and for the people that I help, e-commerce just happens to be the vehicle. This is a yap and a half. I thought I'd make this video just to give you some background on me and just to give you a bit more perspective as to who I am, what I do, how I got here. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, give a thumbs up, subscribe. There's definitely going to be some more videos dropping, and I'll see you in the next one.